Thank you very much, Dr. Khaled. We have now the floor open for questions. I have about 10 lined up. I think on the back of that last presentation, which has reminded us immediately after the meeting in Vienna that on the ground in Syria, the country remains in many ways the crucible of this conflict between violent extremism, the forces of an autocratic state, and those forces which strive for the creation of civic and secular governance in parts of this region. And this is something that is not just confined to this region, but as we have seen in Afghanistan and elsewhere, is much wider and global. So I will now take the first question. And the first question is Walid Abu Khalid from Saudi Arabia. You are live,
right.
I think.
Thank you. Probably a comment plus question to His Excellency, the Secretary Hammond. I tried to count how many times in your speech you used the term Islamic extremism. And after the count of 20, I gave up. So it was a lot. I listened also to the honorable guest speakers, and it was 0 times. They've never said Islamic extremisms, but only used the term extremisms. I think my question to you, really, Your Excellency, is don't you think when you use those terms, Islamic extremisms, then you're supporting Daesh in recruiting Muslims all over the world as if it's a fight against Islam rather than extremisms? I can assure you that's the view from the street, and I just hope we just call them extremisms rather than Islamic extremisms. They have nothing to do with Islam. They killed more Muslims than any other religion.
Thank you very much. I'll take another question from Yusuf Amrani from Morocco. And let me just... This is the first time, by the way, I've used this system, so you'll have to bear with me. You should be live.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me first thank Secretary of State Hammond for his brilliant intervention. I think he really pointed out the real question today we're facing as far as fighting extremism and terrorism. And I agree with him that, and I share the views that we need a coherent and sustained counter-messaging. And this should be done in partnership, essential, and we need to have the voices. Like in the case of Morocco, for example, where we are training imams today in Africa and even in Europe, I think success will come only if we join our efforts. And in this connection, I would like to ask you, what is your vision and how you intend to work with all partners? Because at the end of the day, we are all targeted, Europeans, in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, because the extremists and terrorist movement have a clear vision and they target us all. And I think we need to have a comprehensive response towards this kind of phenomenon. Of course, this includes counter-messaging and also economic development and political development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will take another question from Hee-Sung Kwon from the Republic of Korea. Let me just shift you up to, you should be live.
Oh, okay, it's right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I thank Foreign Secretary Hammond for sharing the excellent program countering violent extremism in the UK. And my government has been struggling to introduce such an excellent program for the precautionary purposes, as we have also challenges from violent extremism. And I've been leading the Korean Provincial Reconstruction Team, PRT, in the Parwan province of Afghanistan a few years ago. And I have recognized the traditional important role played by the elders and mullahs in the form of Shura Council or Loya Jirga. And I'm wondering what kind of program countering violent extremism in Afghanistan are in place, utilizing these important assets you have. And in Syria, Syria has been suffering from this civil war first, then the popping up of violent extremism in the form of Al-Nusra Front and Daesh and many other extremist organizations. So you are in the middle of fighting against violent extremism, but in no way Islam or any other religion have anything to do with violent extremism. These things are these findings are the result of our extensive consultations and the discussions since the last year in and around the United Nations. So I am fully behind the argument made by the Moroccan colleagues. Thank you.
Take another couple of questions and then ask the panel to respond. I've got another 8 or so after that. So, Dr. Hisham Helia, UK.
Thank you very much, JJ. This is the Foreign Secretary. Thank you for your quite comprehensive review of the extremism strategy. A comment and then a question. My comment relates to how comprehensive actually the strategy actually is, because most of what you said, and indeed the text of the review of the strategy itself, focus primarily, I think, on ideological issues, and I wonder if we ought not to pay more attention to looking at other issues, dissent on particular policies, the inability, not domestically, obviously in the UK, but abroad, to engage in certain political processes. And as a comment to that, also the issue around trust from within our own Muslim communities in the UK in terms of cooperating with such a strategy if they feel that they're being targeted. My question relates to one particular article within the extremism strategy, and that's number 104, which relates to citizenship. And I quote, "In our review, we will also consider who should be automatically entitled to citizenship," reasonable enough, "and how we can more easily revoke citizenship from those who reject our values." And that to me is a very dangerous point, because it establishes different tiers of citizenship, unless the actual clause will not actually be taken forward. But the idea that we will revoke citizenship from British citizens, I think, hits at the very core of the basis of the modern nation state, and I think we need to be very careful about how we proceed down that particular route. So I'd appreciate your comment on that particular point specifically. Thank you.
Thanks, Hisham. I'll take one more question from Faisal Abbas from Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. My question is to His Excellency, Mr. Hammond. Thank you very much for your speech, and they say it's better to come late than never with regards to combating violent extremism and terrorism. Having lived in the UK myself, I was actually surprised by the kind of misuse of tolerance that exists. However, do you think this strategy will also include countries that support terrorism? As you know, with the lifting of the sanctions on Iran, there's been this sense of excitement in the UK, and from what I've read, the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself is either leading or has already went with a delegation of businessmen from the UK to Tehran to discuss potential business deals. What measures can the UK introduce to ensure this money that's going to spur into Iran does not go to harm the likes of Mr. Khoja or the likes of the UK allies in the Gulf?
Thank Thank you very much. I think we will pause there to give the panel a chance to respond. And I think since most of the questions have been about the counter-extremism strategy and its impact, in some cases quite detailed, but with one very interesting nuance about Afghanistan and the role of traditional means of mediation and social cohesion. So perhaps I could ask the Secretary of State to respond first.
Well, thank you. First of all, the first questioner asked me why I was referring to extremism as Islamic extremism, and actually the third questioner also made a related point. We recognize, and our extremism strategy specifically recognizes that this is not the only form of extremism we face, extremist Islamism. We also face extreme right-wing ideologies in the UK, which we also have to deal with through this extremist strategy. I accept that maybe when we talk about extremism in this region, it's taken for granted that we're talking about this particular type of extremism, but in the UK it's necessary to explain which area of extremism we're focusing on. And I think both the first and the third questioner were querying the wisdom of referring to it as Islamic extremism because it's not Islamic. Well, look, we all recognize and we regularly say that this brand of ideology has nothing to do with the peaceful religion of Islam. But it would be deluding ourselves to close our minds to the link that there is there. It would be deluding ourselves to ignore the way part of the strength of the ideology of Daesh, as I said in my speech at the beginning, is that it isn't simply a fabricated ideology. It is a perversion of a very well-established and deep-rooted religion, one of the major religions of the world. And it is stronger and more credible because it claims to be an interpretation of that religion. Now, you will say it is not an interpretation of that religion, it's a travesty of that religion, and I would agree with you. But we can't simply say they're wrong, therefore we won't fight them. They're wrong, therefore we must fight them. And we must take them on their own ground. If they insist that their ideology is an interpretation of Islam, and they would say the correct and the only correct interpretation of Islam, then you have to take them head on. You have to challenge them. You have to fight back. You have to present the counter-arguments. So I feel that we have to do this. We have to challenge that. I'm sorry if using the term Islamist extremist offends anyone, but to the millions and millions, hundreds of millions of moderate practitioners of Islam around the world, I would say take up that challenge and let's work together to fight back and reclaim your religion. I was asked about vision for working with partners. We work very well with partners across the world. There are many practical relationships with partners, for example, in trying to impede the flow of finance and foreign fighters to Daesh in Syria and Iraq. But we also need to work more closely on developing Islamic counter-narratives, working because people like me can't really credibly present the counter-narrative to the extremist Islamist narrative. It has to be people who speak as Muslims who present that counter-narrative, and we want to work together with Muslim countries and Muslims around the world to ensure that their voice is clearly and loudly heard. And of course the point about economic development is well taken. At the root of much of the spread of extremism is grievance, social grievance, economic grievance, and addressing that economic grievance through the way we support economic development throughout the world is an important part of the overall agenda. On the question about our counter-extremist narrative, it is a UK narrative. It's focused on the domestic challenges that we face in the UK. And I absolutely recognise, and we've debated for endless hours, the balance between recognizing the problem, not in any sense trying to duck the problem, and trying not to allow British Muslims to feel that they are being targeted. 99.9% of British Muslims should feel relieved, should feel protected by the fact that we have at last recognized the need to do something about the tiny minority within their community who are seeking to undermine it and to pervert their religion and to do things in their name which frankly they do not support and never will support. And I was asked a specific question about revocation of citizenship. We do believe, and let me be clear at the beginning, the UK courts and the European courts have already established that we cannot revoke citizenship of someone who is a mono-British national, who has no other citizenship. So the only case in which revocation of citizenship is a relevant question, a relevant option, is where we're dealing with a dual national who holds citizenship of the UK and of another country. And our position on this is pretty clear. We don't ask you to enthusiastically endorse all our values. We recognize that people can question and challenge our values. But where people come to our country, seek British citizenship, only to actively attack and undermine our core values, yes, we must have available to us the tool of revocation of citizenship. Yes, we must be able to say that, frankly, we do not welcome that kind of contribution to our country.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Minister, you would like to comment on the Afghanistan?
Well, thank you. Let me first of all thank Mr. Han Seng-Kwan, and of course we are grateful for the assistance that the Korean government has been giving us. We appreciate and we value. On the issue of what kind of programs do we have in Afghanistan to fight extremism, I just would like to say one thing, that Afghanistan has always been a very tolerant and moderate society. I can give you the example that the Buddha statues existed in Afghanistan for hundreds or centuries in Afghanistan. No one tried to destroy them. No Afghan ruler or government tried to destroy them until the arrival of this the Taliban, who introduced a new version of Islam that was new to Afghanistan. Of course, we do have programs in the current case to fight extremism and to, first of all, to educate. And as you rightly mentioned, that Afghanistan is a country of councils, or what we call it in jirgas, and elders play an important part, and therefore one of the ways to convince people or to give the message is through these councils. And one of the programs that we have in Afghanistan is to train ulama, to provide them a chance to visit countries, other Muslim countries, and see how the ulama or the Islamic scholars there work. This program with our friends in UAE is there, and there are programs that we send ulama for those visits. They go, they get training for a few weeks and then come back to Afghanistan. So yes, this is a challenge that we agree, but it's a challenge that we are ready to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think actually I'm now, because we are pressed for time, because we do need to finish this session absolutely on time in about 7 minutes' time, I'm going to exercise chairperson's privilege and invite 2 or 3 more questions, 3 maximum. So please keep it very, very, very concise. And I'm going to invite those who do not belong to IISS and those who have not asked a question before. And then I will ask the panel to respond in reverse order, taking some of the issues as well that have already been covered. So I will pass immediately to Bareha Alameddin to ask a question. And please, if we can keep this very concise.
Thank you, John. I have a very short comment to Secretary, to Foreign Minister Hammond. I've sat endlessly at the Foreign Office, Minister, listening to Minister Haig and other officials telling us about the threat of terrorism, indeed, in Syria if the situation is not solved. And here we are 5 years on talking about terrorism in Syria. My question to you, sir, is that you just came back from Vienna, and I wonder if you today are more optimistic of finding a solution quicker, and does really the presence of Iran with all what it does in Syria really help find a solution? I have another small question to Dr. Khoja. Dr. Khoja, are you more optimistic today of finding a solution to the Syrian problem after Vienna? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now ask Dr. Philip Lee, UK. Let me just make your microphone live.
Thank you, JJ. Can I welcome the Foreign Secretary's robust speech and the content of it? I fully support. In terms of challenging extremism, I've long thought that the emancipation of women, both domestically in Britain, but I'm sure this applies across the region, would be key to having a positive influence, a pacifying influence, if you forgive me, upon it is predominantly men who are attracted to an extremist interpretation of a religion or a political creed, and I wonder what the panel thought about that.
Thank you very much. On that note, I will take two more questions. One from both from women. Dr. Huda Al-Halisi from the Shura Council in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to extend a genuine thank you to all speakers, not just on this panel, but also on all previous panels. What I have to say is more of a comment than a question. I agree with everything that was said about working together to fight extremism on a macro level. But for a world to be truly free of extremism, we need to do more with regards to education worldwide, because tolerance really starts at home. We need to educate families to be moderate and introduce classes throughout a child's scholastic years to teach them about tolerance and acceptance of differences, whether religious, social or national, and show them the devastating domino effect of intolerance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's admirably concise, if I might say so. And the last question from Ragana Dargam from the US. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. There you are. You should be live.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, Mr. Secretary, you are the person who had brought to the fore the idea of the departure of President Bashar al-Assad later. You just sort of left it as an open possibility, not now, sort of. You spoke of the departure of Bashar al-Assad, but later on, in effect, you did not. You started that process of not defining when. Do you feel now that there is a need to define a better timetable? And what do you think of Minister Adel Jubair's proposal that he obviously put to you in Vienna, that there should be a timetable for the withdrawal of both the Russian and the Iranian forces from Syria? And Mr. Khoja, what do you think of that one as well? You're calling them occupation forces, but your allies are sitting and debating and negotiating with them. Are you singing out of the group there? I mean, are you included in any way? And what do you think of the 18 months to take that new Syria forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will ask the panel to respond again briefly, if they may, in reverse order. So starting with Dr. Khaled.
Pertaining to the matter of Daesh and countering terrorism, in light of our experience in Syria and even our experience in Iraq, the orchestrators of Daesh are not legitimate leaders. They are rather security leaders. These are the orchestrators of Daesh. We're not talking about extremists leading Daesh. Security apparatus are leading Daesh. The mechanisms for decision-making processes within Daesh are made by 8 security former officers from Al-Ba'ath Party who were making decisions, whether decisions made under the cover of Islam or decisions that achieve advances, military speaking, for Daesh and winning battles against other extremist groups. The proof of that is that Al-Hajj Baghdadi is a former leader in the Iraqi army. He is awarded an Iraqi formal award as a former official, and you can conduct a research about him and find out all of this about him. As for countering terrorism, a very important issue is that of approaches adopted throughout the past years in fighting terrorism. It is obvious that these strategies were not efficient. When fighting terrorism, we should steer clear from adopting strategies like those that were used in Iraq. For example, the popular mobilization technique. This is something that leads to the destruction of societies, to the death of civilians, and that leads to the creation of a total chaos. We should not use terrorist methods to fight terrorism. If the grassroots do not support and embrace the tools for fighting terrorism, then our approaches are not successful. We need support from the grassroots, from the popular environment in the areas in which terrorists try to sow chaos for us to be able to fight terrorism and vanquish it. The same applies to occupation. How can we deal with an occupation force that works to strengthen the position of Bashar al-Assad in Syria? How can we reach a political solution with such an occupation force? What we need is political will from the friends of the Syrian people or the countries that support a political solution in Syria in the face of this arrogance, the arrogance of the regime in Syria and the arrogance and rogueness of Iran. We need strength behind this political will to impose the political solution. As for optimism, we're always optimistic. Throughout the past 5 years, we had to face an oppressive regime that controlled the power in Syria over the past 50 years. It resorted to the help of Iran with its proxies in Iraq and its militias. We were capable in the past of vanquishing those, but today the Shiite militias that were brought in from Iran are equal in power to the Syrian army. 350,000 military members used to fight alongside the regime in the past. Today, the regime only has 68,000 troops. But the Syrian opposition is still maintaining its positions. The Iranian proxies were vanquished, and Russia did not succeed in making any advances for the regime. I feel that the Syrian people will achieve the ambitions of the citizens, and international community support will strengthen our position. Thank you.
Most of the questions, the rest of the questions were addressed to the Secretary of State. I will give him, I think, the last word in this session because time is almost up and people have to move on. Secretary of State.
Thank you. Well, let me try and deal quickly with these. Vienna, optimism. Look, it was a remarkable achievement to get the Saudis and the Iranians sitting together across the table for 8.5 hours and agreeing at the end of it to come back and sit down again in 2 weeks' time. So we're talking. And I know if John Kerry was here, he would say that is the first step. Once you start talking, you start a process. So let us move forward optimistically, but also recognizing the reality that there is still a huge gap between those of us who believe that Bashar al-Assad must go at a point in the transition that is fixed, and those like the Russians and Iranians who believe that he must be entitled to take part in a future democratic process, and only the Syrian people in that process can decide his fate. So there's still a very big gap between us. On Dr. Lee's question, does the emancipation of women help to dampen extremism? Very simple. All the evidence suggests yes. Women are a moderating influence in most activities, and the more women are active in social groups, the less likely extremism is to flourish. But I think there's another point as well that I'd like to make. Grievance lies at the root of vulnerability to extremism, and economic grievance, but in many societies, economic exclusion has very far-reaching consequences. If you are economically excluded, if you don't have a job, if you can't generate income, wealth, you can't marry, you can't have a family, the consequences can be very significant and build people's sense of grievance. And I think we have to, one of the things we'll be doing in our extremism analysis unit is trying to understand the workings of the mind of a young man who feels excluded from society, who feels that all his routes forward are cut off, and how that makes him vulnerable to the messages being preached by the extremists. And finally, on the question of tolerance and education, absolutely agree. Education, understanding is absolutely the key. And I can only speak about our education system in the UK. My kids know more about Islam and Buddhism than they do about Christianity, because our religious education in schools is absolutely not about Christianity. It's about understanding religions and the principles of religions worldwide. And I think, I have to say, I think that is the right way to go.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. We have come to the end. I apologise very much to all those I couldn't call. I think time was just too tight. And this, of course, is an incredibly complex, sensitive and interesting issue. So next year, and it's not going away, so next year we will devote more time to it. I have two announcements to make. One is that we now have a break for lunch. There's lunch for delegates in the Villa Gazebo, and for heads of delegation with the Bahraini Foreign Minister. The next plenary, which is the fourth plenary, will start at 4 o'clock this afternoon, 1600. And I'd like to say thank you very much to our very distinguished panel for answering questions so frankly, to Dr. Khoja, to Minister Rabbani, and to the Secretary of State. And if you would join me in... Thank you.